Hey guys, it's Scott from fxmissions.com. Just a note, I've finished the trilogy of Anthologies from the Forefront, and all 3 books are currently available on Amazon.
Take your leadership to the next level. It's time for the Foundational Missions Leadership Moment with Scott McClelland of FX Missions.
Hi, Scott McClelland with your FX Missions Leadership Moment. Thanks for being here. We're in the middle of a 2-part podcast with a special guest, Bryan Entzminger. Bryan, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Man, I really enjoyed the previous podcast, and I want to point those who are listening here who might not have heard it. The previous podcast, the first one in these 2-part series from Bryan, if you haven't heard it and you're listening to this, press pause here, go back up 1 episode, select it, and they will stand alone, but I think you'll enjoy that first podcast. So thank you for that very much. Some of the pillars, I would call that pillars of quality leadership: courageous humility, caring responsibility, and nurturing influence. Wow. Good stuff, Bryan. Wow.
Thanks.
Man, I have trouble not talking into it too much. I want them to hear your perspective. So yes, please do check that out there. We've got a couple of pieces we're going to add to it here. We're going to talk a little bit about leadership styles and maybe some contrary leadership styles to the one you unrolled for us or unfolded for us on the first podcast. And then we're going to switch gears to a little bit of the Jesus style example that you were saying you picked up in your observation and study of him. So let's jump right in.
Sure.
Specifically when it comes to leadership styles and even the contrary leadership styles that you've observed, both in Scripture and probably all around us. What would you like to say about that?
I guess, as I thought about leadership styles, and especially what I think that I see a lot of times in North America, there were definitely some things that were contrary to what I think I see in Scripture, and as I look at how leadership works within a family. And one of the first things that I see that's in my mind, pretty rampant, especially in the U.S., at least in the circles where I see this kind of thing, is really a sense of people who are chasing after power. They're trying to assume authority, maybe at the right time, maybe authority that should be theirs. I can't necessarily speak to that, but I see that all around, and that's one of the things that really concerned me. And as I thought about this, I thought, well, I do see this in Scripture. As I think about the ministry of Moses, where we see before the Exodus, there's this experience where he sees someone being mistreated and he jumps in and tries to take control, and it wasn't the right time. And so that really went pretty badly for him, at least at that time, right? He left that and he spent 40 years in exile. So it didn't really go very well. And I see that kind of thing happen as well, where people they want the title or they want to take, for lack of a better term, even if it's for the good of others, they want to take something rather than waiting for it to be given to them. The next one I saw, and it's also a Moses example, and it'll sound kind of weird to say it's a Moses example, but there was the disempowering leader, the leader who tries to do everything, who doesn't provide opportunities or provide guidance for other leaders to come up. And the place that I saw this in Moses' life was when he was the judge over all of the people, and from dusk to dawn, everybody was coming to him with their problems until his father-in-law said, hey man, you got to do this differently or this is going to kill you. And then he put a structure in place to allow other people to take a portion of that burden, which we can look at it 2 different ways. One, we can look at it from an organizational model and say, well, this is how you should structure an organization so it works efficiently. The other way you can look at it is going, wait a minute, I'm surrounded by these other leaders. Why not provide them with the opportunity to step in and do what they do? These people, these leaders of families, the 10s, the 50s, the 100s, the thousands, these are already people who are in relationship, who already have authority. They needed the opportunity to step into that in a different way so that they could judge the people and make those decisions. The next one that I saw is really kind of related to the person who chases after the power. And this is what I call the submit to me leader, the leader who thinks that they're the most important person, that everything is about preserving their ability to continue. Everything about the organization is for their service, for theirs to expend. It's at the expense of others even. And the example I thought of that was Rehoboam, where after the reign of Solomon, the people came to him and said, you know what, Solomon made life a little bit tough for us. Would you consider some ways that you might make this a little bit better? And he went to a set of his father's leaders, his father's counselors, and they said, yeah, you should probably listen to the people because they're the people you govern. Then he went to his friends, the younger counselors, and they said, no, man, they're challenging your authority. They didn't say it in these words, but they said they're challenging your authority, so this is what you need to do. And he went out and he made it all about his authority and about how they couldn't do what they wanted to do, and it ended up fracturing the kingdom. Now, we know from Scripture that this was not something that was contrary to God's will, but it was a leadership style that we certainly don't want to emulate. And then standing in contrast to that is what I call the permissive leader. This is the person who wants everybody to succeed, but never provides guidance, never provides anything that would help them avoid failure or help them grow in character. That means, not having those difficult conversations, not setting boundaries, not providing the resources sometimes that are needed. And for that one, I saw David and Absalom and their relationship and how it said in Scripture that his whole life, David had never told Absalom no. And that's how things turned out that way. So those are 4 ways that I saw that were contrary to the kind of leadership that I hope I see in my life and in the lives of the people around me.
Man, as we're listening, as we're onboarding your commentary here, I think we can see around us so many examples of this. As you mentioned, each one here you have a kind of a scriptural sort of a type from Scripture of these kinds of leaders. But as we think about it, I think we can look all around us and say, aha, yeah, I mean, I've seen this and that. And the chasing after power thing, of course, is all around us.
Yeah.
This empowering leader and the permissive leader thing they could work together even.
Oh, yeah.
You're not really empowering anybody, but you're letting people do whatever. I think we could see some combinations.
Yeah.
Like you said, the submit to me and chasing after power also would be a sort of a classic combination.
Yeah. Well, and if you can help me get it down to 3 points, then it's a sermon, right?
I guess it is. Yep. We're getting closer, but we might have 3 main points with 2 subpoints each.
That's great.
Yeah. One thing that I've observed, and I'm sure you have, and I want to make sure and say, I think we've got to be really careful as we're thinking about the leadership styles that we observe that seem contrary to the example of Scripture or what the Lord is leading us to or what we're growing into. We've got to be careful not to think about everybody else as these people and not think about, hey, you know what? Maybe I could find my sort of go-to on this list. Where is my weakness being exploited?
Oh, yeah.
When it comes to leadership? If we judge ourselves, like the Scripture teaches, we won't be judged. If we evaluate ourselves first before evaluating others, very, very important. I think for me, I really think I need to apply that.
If I could jump in, the one that scares me the most, that I think I'm most likely to see in my life, is the permissive leader, the one who doesn't challenge people to grow, the one who allows things that maybe shouldn't be allowed because I don't want to have those tough conversations. So that's the one that speaks to me.
So as we're going through a process of maturity, we might find that some weaknesses that we have overcome in your examples are something that we put that to rest, or maybe that's no longer we're no longer chasing after power, but now we've got a kind of another weakness. Maybe we're looking the other way over on things that need to be confronted in a reaction to us being the submit to me guy before
Yeah.
that. Overreaction, I'd say.
Yeah.
So, wow, some excellent points there. We're going to finish up here with some thoughts from you in terms of how Jesus contrasted to the chasing after power, the disempowering leader, the submit to me leader, the permissive leader. What have you seen in Jesus' example when it came to his leadership? How is that a contrast to what we've discussed?
Oh, man. Looking at Jesus as a leadership example, as the leadership example, is very humbling. As I looked at it, one of the things that stood out to me, as I thought first, is that Jesus learned obedience through what he suffered. Scripture talks about how, as he was growing up, he learned obedience through the things that he suffered. Now, there's a couple of different ways to hear suffer. One is to hear it as suffering, as though going through physical trial. The other way is to endure things through the things that you allow. I can't speak to exactly what Scripture meant in that sense because I haven't researched it, but clearly Jesus learned obedience, which means that he learned how to lay down the authority that was actually rightfully his in order to be subjected to the authority of another person. Later, we see that he spoke with authority, and we know that he spoke the truth even when it hurt. We even know that he spoke the truth in instances where doing something else could have gotten him out of trouble, or what was perceived as trouble. We see that he was not afraid to defend the oppressed, that he didn't value, for lack of a better term, the organization over the whole or over the individual,
Right.
that he very clearly loved the individual and that he put the needs of others first. But he also honored both the group and the individual. You know, he honored the 5,000 people. We don't see in Scripture that he singled out a single person from the 5,000 and
Right.
said, feed that person first. He honored them all, but clearly he took care of all of them. And then we see, and this is the example, right? We see that even though he was one with God, he didn't grasp or hold on to that equality or consider it something to be grabbed onto. Instead, he became
Right.
a servant and was obedient, even to being tortured to death. And because of that, God has exalted him to the highest place.
Wow. The example for leadership and life,
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, cannot be improved upon. And we've got to thank God in every recognition of that reality. Jesus gave us such a good example. You know, I love the book of Hebrews for the way that it analyzes and examines so much of what Jesus did, especially even contrast to the old covenant and how he fulfilled and brought this stuff forward. Beautiful, beautiful examples. Jesus is our example. And the Philippians 2 reference there at the end. I love that, man. That's a tough chapter. I think we could spend some time there when it comes to how we relate to the concept of power. That is something that we could benefit from. I continue to be amazed at the fact that Jesus, when he's in a position of power, that he has power, but he doesn't exercise it in the way that, you know, I could call a legion of angels down and deal with this problem if I wanted to, but he didn't. And he let that process play completely out. From a position of being who he was, he did not respond in a retaliatory way. That's so hard.
Yeah.
When you're in a position of power and someone does something offensive to you or someone does something egregious to you, not to react. It's within your power to react aggressively. I got a lot of growing to do, Bryan.
Me too.
We all do, I think. But he is clearly, as Scripture indicates, he predestined us to the image of his Son, to be like Jesus. So there's grace for our growth. I believe it. Wow. Any final or parting thoughts you want to share as we come to the close here?
I think it just kind of goes back to one of your comments earlier about finding the point of tension, that it's easy to go from one extreme to the other. And the challenge, I think, is to accept the role of responsibility that you've been given in whatever sphere of influence that is, whether it's your family or a work organization or whatever, to accept that and to continue to grow, but not to grab at it or hold on to it as though it's yours, and also not to shirk it, to actually take that responsibility seriously and to continue to grow, but not with the idea of exalting yourself. Instead, with the idea of just finding more ways to serve the people around you and allowing God to give you the opportunity to serve however He sees fit.
There's some key stuff in that one little recap there. It reminds me of the guy in Proverbs, right? The city's in terrible trouble. They found some poor, wise old man. They brought him out. He said, do this. The city was saved. They quickly forgot about him.
Yeah.
I think I was dumbfounded by that scripture for so many years. How could this be? I lived a little since then.
Yeah.
And I've realized that I know how that could be. It seems like, especially as we're beginning in our leadership process, we've got ideas about leadership that are unfounded. How could the old man who had the wisdom to save the city be marginalized, pulled from the margins, save the city, and quickly be marginalized again?
Yeah.
That's the way it sometimes works. But Jesus gave us an example that encompasses, that falls under the umbrella. Jesus was certain in his sonship. He couldn't be tempted to try to prove himself. He demonstrated dignity in the face of opposition and hate and scrutiny and crucifixion.
Yeah.
Look no further for the example of all examples when it comes to leadership. Thank you so much for reminding us of that, Bryan.
Oh,
very powerful.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to think about this.
Man, it's good stuff. And I think a lot of people are going to be thinking about it a lot just as a result of this talk. Now, again, guys, if you didn't hear the first part of the podcast, the first of these two podcasts, go back and check that out and enjoy that and be intrigued and be inspired and be challenged by Bryan Entzminger and his contribution to the leadership moment. Bryan, your podcast, you've got your own podcast. How many episodes in now?
Oh, man. I forget what I just published. I know that I just, I think that it's 243 or 244 right now as we're recording this.
Wow. That is awesome, man. That is powerful. EngagingMissions.com. That's where you can find Bryan and his social media contacts and his reams of podcasts that he's done with ministry and missions leaders from literally all over the world. I've always and continue to be encouraged when I have been on Engaging Missions. You're in Google Play, you're in Apple Podcasts, you're in Stitcher, I think I'm speaking right, am I?
Yeah, I try to be as many places as I can where I think people might find the show and find it valuable.
Yes. Well, I encourage everyone to quickly get to engagingmissions.com, sign up for your platform and your format or however you receive your podcast, and instantly be encouraged and instantly be equipped at a higher level. Really appreciate you being here, Bryan. Anything else you want to mention before we go?
No, I just appreciate getting to talk to you and to share this.
Man, and I'm looking forward to seeing you soon, as I'll be in Nashville.
Yeah.
Maybe around a month, I think. So I look forward to catching up with you in person, maybe seeing your family again if they're available. I know they've grown a lot since I saw you last. Wow. What a blessing. Well, thanks again for being here, Bryan.
You're welcome.
This is Scott McClelland with your FX Missions Leadership Moment at fxmissions.com. You can reach it out to us by email at info@fxmissions.com. Thanks for listening to the Leadership Moment. Rate us wherever you find your podcasts. And until next time on the Leadership Moment, have a good one.
This Leadership Moment was produced in partnership with Engaging Missions. Have your leadership question answered by contacting Scott at scott@fxmissions.com. Visit FX Missions to learn more about how you can grow your leadership and engage in missions. Visit engagingmissions.com for encouragement, insight, and resources from missions missionaries, ministry leaders, and church planters.